Malcolm Harris was not a happy man for that matter, and neither was his wife Jessica. Lately, their marriage had been a little sluggish. No, to be completely honest with himself, their marriage wasn't just sluggish. It had practically stopped. It wasn't that they weren't trying, but the relationship between him and his wife was becoming increasingly strained. They'd been married for 24 years and known each other for almost 30 years, and you'd think that in that long a time together, they'd have learned to iron out the wrinkles. But this time, it was somehow different. He didn't know when it started, but he knew when he noticed it. It was 6 weeks ago, on a Saturday night. They had been shopping most of the day. It was their usual routine for the last 10 years, like everything else they did. After shopping, they stopped for a bite to eat at their usual establishment. Although they could have ordered something else from the menu, they had already tried all the dishes offered, so whatever they ordered was also routine. Then home to unload the shopping, put everything away, and watch a little TV. Close to 10 o'clock, he began to feel the familiar tingling in his crotch, his body already anticipating what the years of marriage usually predicted would happen on Saturday night. All routine. The number of times their weekend cycle was broken could be counted on their fingers and toes, and it was usually because of Jesse's monthly afflictions, or in those even rarer moments when one of them was sick. Jessie was now 46, and had not yet entered that stage of her life which men dread almost more than women, and which is called menopause. So they were careful to make sure Jessie didn't get pregnant, since she wasn't taking birth control pills. Despite this, Malcolm looked forward to Saturday nights. During the week, since they both worked long hours, Jessie never did more than cook and clean. Malcolm helped with chores, including cooking and even cleaning, on the days Jessie stayed late at work. Still, Jessie complained that she was too tired or not in the mood. That wasn't always the case. Unfortunately, those surprisingly pleasant days were far behind them. Lately, Malcolm sometimes tried to carve out time during the work week, but Jessie never gave up, and Saturday night was special for them. When 10 o'clock came, Malcolm waited for Jessie to get up, go upstairs and take a shower while he watched TV before going to wash up and meeting her in bed. He felt a small smile appear on his face as he waited for Jessie to get down to her usual routine. Yes, he was really looking forward to his time with Jessie. And she never moved from her seat. She sat reading a book, occasionally looking up to see what was on TV and then going back to reading. He waited, but as his anticipation grew, so did his disappointment, and finally he asked in a soft but manly tone, "Honey, are you going to shower?" It was a moment before she looked up at him, blinking a couple times through her reading glasses. "I'm sorry, honey, what did you say?" she asked, not giving any sign that she'd heard his question. "I asked if you were going to take a shower and—" He waved the question away, thinking she'd take the hint. "Oh," she said, averting her gaze. After a moment, she took a deep breath and turned to him again. "Not tonight, Malcolm." Not sure he'd heard correctly, Malcolm sat there for a few seconds, somewhat stunned, as his wife returned to her book. She didn't look sick, and he knew it wasn't that time of the month because, when it was, she got very irritable, but now she was her most normal self. Plus, she would have told him. But he asked anyway, in case he had missed something. He'd been working extra hours at the factory for the last month and coming home drained, so something might have gotten past him. "Are you feeling okay, Jessie?" Without lifting her eyes from her book, she replied, "Yeah, I'm fine." He waited a little longer to see if she'd add anything else, but she continued reading. "So what's the problem?" he asked in a carefully calibrated tone. With a loud sigh, she closed the book with a snap, placing it on the edge table, and stood up. "What do you mean? Just because I don't want to do this tonight, you think something's wrong? Look, Malcolm, I just don't feel like doing it. It's as simple as that. Okay?" His thoughts were jumbled by her unexpected answer. He tried to digest her words, and then, unable to think of a rational reason for his wife's attitude, he passed out. All he could do was stare at her with surprise, shock, and some resentment. Her tone was cold, even calculating and definitely adamant, and in her quiet voice he thought he heard something else that he had often heard in other places, but never in his house of hate. She turned and walked out, headed for the stairs and practically jogged up to the second floor. But before she turned away, he saw something on her face that made his soul freeze with disgust. As soon as he saw it, her face smoothed to a detached calm. He sat there, suddenly feeling very alone, and a nauseating rumbling grew in his stomach. Sometimes he would slowly become aware of what was going on in his house. As the children grew older, he would notice minor changes happening to them, and if he didn't immediately understand the reason for them, he would sit down and think about the situation until he came to a consensus. This time it had happened suddenly, intuitively, without any thought. She had distanced herself from him, and he had somehow missed all the signs. He didn't know what had caused the change in Jessie that he had just experienced, but he suspected that it hadn't happened instantly. It had been happening for years, maybe always, but she had somehow managed to hide it from him, or at least handle it better. Until tonight, that is. And that knowledge didn't make him feel any better. He felt even more confused and deeply confused. Malcolm loved his wife very much, even more than he did today, when they had met 30 years ago. Next chapter. He had just turned 17 and was at the park with his friends, drinking beer in honor of his belated birthday and generally enjoying the day when she ran past. They were bantering and whistling for her, but it seemed like they were just an annoying breeze because, with a fleeting glance, she ignored them and in a couple of seconds was already rushing past them, disappearing among the trees lining the path she was running on. Malcolm had dated a few girls, but this girl running past him made his heart beat merrily and his stomach beat even more merrily. He knew he had to meet her. She was a goddess. It was weeks before he saw her again, but not for lack of trying. He was in the park every chance he got, hoping to see her again. He imagined meeting her. He spent every waking hour dreaming about it. Not that he was truly prepared, for how could one prepare to meet a goddess? Nevertheless, he had to try. He leaned against the trunk of his car, arms crossed, and was almost dozing in the warm Sunday sunshine when he heard the sound of quick footsteps approaching through the fallen leaves in a rhythm of footsteps. He stood up, suppressing a yawn, and tried to look nonchalant. And then she appeared. She was wearing the same clothes as before, though her printed t-shirt might have been a different pattern. But it was hard to tell, especially since his attention was focused on how well the pattern stood out and how it rose and fell in rhythm with her stride. Gaining courage, he waved his hand carelessly. Gotta act cool, he thought, but she didn't even glance in his direction. Knowing his time was limited to a couple seconds, he pushed off the trunk, straightened up, and called out to her. Hi. She didn't slow her step, but turned her head and smiled at him. She was smiling. To him. The feeling he had felt before, though it had never left him, was back, only twice as strong. No, it was 10 times stronger. His knees went weak and he felt like his heart was about to burst out of his chest. He tried to say something else, but his mouth wouldn't budge. Damn it. Try again. Hey, he stopped. He heard the words sounded like a low quacking, not manly or even boyish, more like the singing of a pond frog. He quickly tried to clear his throat by swallowing, but his mouth was dry. His tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth, and before he could utter another word, she disappeared among the trees. He stood like that for a few eternities, stunned, before failure came upon him like the impact of a brick. For a moment he thought about running after her, but that might scare her. Besides, it wouldn't be pretty. Shit. I had my chance and I blew it. Good thing she didn't hear me. She probably would have laughed at my frog imitation and never spoken or smiled at me again. Then another, less pleasant thought came to mind. What if I sounded like a frog every time I was near her? Saddened and frustrated by his failed attempt to talk to the goddess, as well as disgusted by his unexpectedly squeaky voice, he opened the door of his car, a 1967 RS Camaro, got in, and was about to start the engine when he heard an angry scream, which was then abruptly cut short. He wasn't sure if it was her, his goddess, but even if it wasn't her, someone was in trouble. Without thinking, he jumped out of the car and rushed down the path. Within seconds, he was there, and it was the goddess, but she wasn't alone. 2 large men had grabbed her and were trying to drag her into the bushes. Without thinking any further, he increased his speed, doing the only thing that came to his mind. Without warning, he slammed into all 3 of them with a swing. Some sixth sense must have alerted one of the young thugs, because he lifted his head at the last moment and looked at Malcolm, his eyes widening with surprise and perhaps fear, before the world shattered in a cacophony of pain and rumbling darkness. Oh, please, wake up, please. He heard a voice, the sweet voice of an angel, calling to him. He tried to open his eyes, but the moment he came to, a sharp pain came over him. The pain seemed to throb sickeningly in his head, but then subsided a little. He felt someone tugging on his arm and tried to open his eyes again. The pain was still there, but it had eased a little and was now bearable. Part of his vision was obscured by a red haze, but the other eye worked perfectly, and he saw a beautiful vision that had to be an angel. No, it was a goddess. His goddess. Can you stand up? I think so. But then a new pain shot through his right arm as he tried to push himself off the ground with it. With a groan of pain, he fell back down. We can't stay here. I think you knocked them out, but they're starting to move and could wake up at any moment. Can you try to get up again? I'll help you. Please try to get up. That wonderfully soothing voice spoke again, but you could hear the worry in it. Okay, I'll try. He used his other hand this time, and it seemed to work. After a few seconds, he stood up, albeit unsteadily. He was in no condition to resist, and as the goddess had said, they needed to leave. He looked at her, and she looked at him. She smiled hesitantly at him. We need to go. I'll help you walk. With those words, she took him under her arm and began to lead him away. And he saw that she was guiding them in the same direction she was running herself. Wait. He stopped and asked her, Do you have a car nearby? She stopped too and looked at him and shook her head negatively. I'm running out of the house and back in. Okay, my car's close by. Go back the other way. If we're hoping to get away, we'd better try to make it. Malcolm tried to explain without getting too confused by the words. He thought he was going to pass out from the growing pain, but somehow he managed to stay on his feet. He doubted she could carry or drag his unconscious weight that far. Besides, it wouldn't be nice to pass out after he was already wheezing and moaning in front of her. Without answering anything, she turned them around and began to lead him to the car. They didn't talk much, mostly silent, each trying to make as little noise as possible to keep the bandits from realizing where they had gone in case they woke up before they were far enough away. They made it to the car without incident, but they thought they heard angry voices coming from the path. Do you know how to drive? Malcolm asked the goddess, smiling weakly at her. I don't think I can drive well enough not to crash us, pointing to his useless and sore arm. She looked at his sore arm and nodded. Yes, I can drive. Automatic and manual. Give me the keys. A wild panic took over his mind as he fumbled his pants pockets with his hand and found no keys. She must have noticed his increasingly desperate search and asked, Do you think you dropped your keys? I don't know. I was just about to leave when I heard, Look in the car, in the ignition, he urged, forgetting his pain for a moment because of the urgency. Yes, the keys are here. Come on, get in. I think I hear them coming, she exclaimed with a nervous tinge in her voice. With a quick stagger, Malcolm walked over to the passenger side and sat inside. It was strange sitting on this side of the car, realizing he was a passenger in his own car. The engine roared with a throaty roar. With a practiced twist of the steering wheel, she backed up, righted the car, and then tore out of the park. The 327 cubic inch engine of the Camaro roared approvingly as they pulled onto the main road and sped away. Although she drove the car seemingly unconcerned, she handled it skillfully. Where are you going? I don't know your name, Malcolm grimaced as he watched her drive. I'm taking you to the hospital, and my name is Jessica. Jessica Ann Robertson. And you are? Jessica. A beautiful name, fit for a goddess. His vision blurred and he felt so tired, but he forced himself to answer. I am Malcolm Harris. My friends call me Mel. You have such a... What was he going to say? His mind blurred and he couldn't remember. Darkness descended upon him, and he was lost in it. Soon all he saw and heard was blurred blackness and the murmur of distant waves, and then complete silence and deep darkness. Next chapter. His musings were interrupted by the waitress, asking if he was ready for another beer. Nodding her head, she left. He stared after the waitress, his thoughts returning to his wife. He asked her if she was in trouble, and she acted as if she wasn't, but he could tell she was lying. Perhaps she knew there was a problem, but at the same time she didn't know what to do about it. It wasn't the first time they'd had a problem, but it was the first time he didn't know what it was, much less what to do to overcome it. Of course, if she wanted to talk to him, they could figure it out and move on. As Malcolm sipped the rest of his beer, all these and other thoughts swirled around in his head. Malcolm didn't usually drink and went to the bar even less often, but the last few weeks at home had been more than stressful, with him and Jesse building up a tired cheerfulness while what was going on loomed over them. Finishing his beer, Malcolm looked around the place he'd chosen to think and drink, or drink and think. Either way, it wasn't the kind of place he usually went to. At least it was quiet. The music coming from the jukebox was light and soft, not too intrusive. The lighting was dim, but not too dim, and no one seemed to care about the stranger sitting alone at one of the corner tables. The bar was also off to the side, and that was the main reason he was here. Malcolm didn't want anyone he knew to come up to him and show undue curiosity. There were only a few people in the establishment at this point, and most of them were men. They looked old enough to be retirees. He noticed how friendly they were with each other and took them for regulars. Several women, not counting the waitress who never brought him a beer, were sitting at the bar talking to each other. Judging by the way they were dressed, not too fancy but professional, they must be office workers who had come to relax, have a few drinks, talk about the day's troubles and jerks, neither of which were excluded, before heading home to their husbands, boyfriends, or cats. "Here you go," the waitress said, placing a new bottle of beer in front of him and removing the empty one. "That'll be $2, 6 bits, she added cheerfully. Malcolm had to twist around in his chair to reach into his wallet and pull out a 10, and holding out the money to her, he said, "Bring another one and keep the change." "Thanks, honey, you're welcome. I'll be right back." After she left to get a second beer, Malcolm glanced around the bar once more, as his face now gave him a new perspective, and then focused back on his problem. Something caught his eye, but his gaze was too quick to dwell on it, so he looked over and saw his neighbor Phyllis sitting at the other end of the room at a corner table. And she wasn't alone, nor was she alone with her husband Henry. He didn't know who was sitting with her, but he was sure it wasn't Henry. Judging by the body signals they were giving each other, he also didn't think this guy was just a friend. Intrigued, even though he was uncomfortable at the sight of his neighbor with someone other than her husband, he continued to watch the couple. She giggled, the man smiled, then he stroked her hand and pulled away. It looked like the guy was tasting the water before jumping in. And Phyllis didn't seem to mind the challenge. The old lady seemed to be going for a little swim herself, as she stroked his arm from time to time. He watched for a few minutes, unable to take his eyes off the couple's antics. It was some sort of mating ritual, and it would have been funny if Malcolm hadn't known that at this very minute Henry was at home, watching some sporting event on his 600-channel satellite dish. Phyllis and Henry were about the same age, and if he remembered correctly, they were both 58. And the man with Phyllis, though he looked younger, was no kid. Phyllis was by no means stunning, but she had a good body. And although her face was beginning to give away her age, she still showed the remnants of her youthful beauty. As for Henry, he was balding, overweight, and, for the most part, as unsportsmanlike and sedentary as was even possible for a man who might still be alive. Despite his love of sports, he went no farther than elbow exercises, watching the games. The man with whom Phyllis sat at the same table seemed younger, but not that much. He was probably Malcolm's age and in good physical shape. It was none of his business, though. When Malcolm finally turned away, he saw a second bottle of beer next to the first. The waitress had come in without his knowledge. He was so engrossed in what he was watching. Better than any old sports show any day, he thought to himself, smiling. Alas, poor Henry. And the moment his face lit up with mirth, he made a sad grimace as his own dilemma made itself felt again. Malcolm thought of calling Henry and telling him about his wife's extracurricular activity, but he quickly dismissed the idea. It was none of his business, and who knew how Henry would react? Perhaps Phyllis and Henry had some sort of arrangement, and he didn't want to get himself in trouble. He had enough problems of his own. As he finished his second beer, he felt a sudden urge to visit the men's room. Not used to drinking, his body was more than ready to cleanse itself. Glancing at Phyllis once more, since he didn't want her to see him, he saw that she had moved to sit closer to the man and was now standing with her back to Malcolm. Washing his hands, He looked in the mirror above the wash basin and saw a face that had seen better days. Not that he was ugly, but he wasn't handsome. The explosion at the factory had not taken him directly into its fiery embrace, but as he and the others rushed to evacuate the building, flaming shrapnel had rained down on him, and one of it had hit him. It wasn't a very bad burn, but it was a burn, and it left its mark on him. Plastic surgery had repaired most of the damage to his epidermis, but some discoloration and small scars remained. His hair, once a rich dark brown color, was now more gray than brown. The more he studied his face, the more it seemed to belong to a stranger. His dark brown eyes, even looking at his reflection, were studying something deeper within him. And he'd be damned if he knew what it was. Wiping his hands, he felt the disgust for his reflection in the mirror building up in him. Tearing his gaze away, he looked down. His gaze, unwilling to think of anything else, focused on the floor. What once might have been a beautiful tile floor was now stained with years of dirt, stained with dried liquids, and covered with scattered crumpled paper towels. Brown towels. The ones pulled in individual sheets from the dispensers hanging on the wall. The ugly ones. Too stiff and rough to dry his hands well enough. And the moment he saw that garbage, he realized that his marriage was exactly the same. It had become like a tile floor with stains, dirt, and scraps of brown paper towels. I need to get home, talk to Jessie and get our marriage in order, Malcolm thought to himself. Then Phyllis and her man and Henry popped into his mind, with more clarity than he would have liked and more than any man should. He had an epiphany. Yeah, he and Jessie had gotten so used to each other that even their relationship had become routine. No wonder she was acting the way she was. What's the old saying? Familiarity breeds contempt. Malcolm didn't know who coined it, but whoever it was a smart asshole. Or maybe just a very experienced asshole. That explained a lot of things, including the look of disgust she'd allowed herself last Saturday night. Feeling the growing satisfaction of solving yet another puzzle that had been plaguing him time and time again, he smiled, and his eyes sparkled. Even looking in the mirror was less tiring than it had been a few minutes ago. Mentally patting himself on the back, he hummed to himself cheerfully, walked out of the bathroom, and returned to the table. As he was about to sit down, he looked to see if Phyllis and her man were sitting at another table. They were, but another couple had joined them. He could easily make out Phyllis. She had returned to her old chair, and the new woman was standing with her back to Malcolm. He caught a glimpse of another new guy, and the new guy seemed to be an exact replica of Phyllis's man. Not that they really looked alike, but their facial features were similar, and their ages and builds were the same. This is getting interesting, Malcolm thought. I wonder which of the neighbors' wives this other woman is. He sat and sipped his beer, watching the two couples laugh from time to time, enjoying themselves. He enjoyed it, taking bets on who this other woman might be. Could it be the unfashionable Doris Cully who lived down the block? The woman was the right height, and her hair, for what it was worth, resembled the simple style she wore. Or maybe it was the slender Heather Letts. She too was about the same height and figure as the mystery woman, only her hair was shorter. So it couldn't be Heather. Could it be Lynette Franklin, the board president of the local elementary school? Now that would be funny. She was a conservative Christian. She wouldn't be caught dead in a place like this and certainly would never be seen with a man other than her husband. Tired of the game, he turned in his seat to face the table and noticed his beer was empty. He considered leaving, but after glancing at his watch, he decided it was too early to head home. He'd forgotten to check messages on his home phone, which could have easily been done from his cell phone. If Jessie was delayed at work again, she would be sure to call the home phone, although until a couple of years ago she always called his cell phone. Yeah, I'll call home and see if Jessie left a message saying she was running late for work, and if so, I might have another one, he thought. Sure enough, Jessie had left a message saying she was going to be late for work and that he shouldn't worry about cooking since she would stop for a snack on the way. I wanted to talk to her about everything, but it looks like it's going to have to wait. Sighing, he closed his phone and slipped it back into his holster. Waving to the waitress, he ordered another beer. Now that it was late evening, the place was a little more crowded. The background hum from people talking had gone up a couple notches, but it still wasn't too bad. At least the jukebox wasn't running any louder than before. Sipping his third mug of beer, He was already more relaxed and realized what the problem with his marriage was, and the sooner he talked to Jesse about it, the sooner they could start working on fixing it. It might not be easy, but damn it, he loved this woman. And as hard as it would be to make things right, it would be worth it. Feeling satisfied, he sat quietly and drank the last of his beer, listening to the conversations at the bar. Phyllis, the two men, and the mystery woman were getting louder as the evening approached. I guess drinking can add to the fun, Malcolm thought. Not my kind of fun, but to each his own. Then he heard the scraping of chairs from what he guessed was the direction of the two couples. Curiosity took over, and he turned so that he could see the two couples. And yes, they were getting up and looked like they were ready to leave. The man with Phyllis put his hand on her back, escorting her to the exit, and Malcolm raised an eyebrow in surprise. Even though he'd already guessed they were very friendly, the fact of it struck him as more than a guess. He thought again. Poor Henry. Shifting his attention to the other woman who was still facing Malcolm, he saw the man place both hands on her waist and speak to her, their faces an inch apart. With morbid anticipation, Malcolm waited for the woman to turn towards him so he could see who she was. She seemed familiar to him, but her style of dress and mannerisms still confused him. He just couldn't locate her. She finally turned around and he stopped puzzling over who this mysterious woman was. And as soon as he realized who she was, she saw him in the same instant. Malcolm, is that you? She exclaimed in a surprised but friendly manner. Malcolm couldn't believe his eyes, and the sight of her overrode his earlier solution to his and Jesse's problem. Yes, it's me, he said breathlessly. As she moved closer to him, he thought he saw a flicker of pity in her eyes. Pity for him? Somehow it awakened a long-buried anger. That's what I thought, but what are you doing here? Where's Jessica? She asked. Although the question didn't sound too timid, you could hear the uncertainty and indecision in her voice. Just like you, got out to have some fun. Only I don't think I had as much fun as you since I'm alone, he replied sarcastically. Malcolm, look, things aren't what they seem. Things aren't the way they used to be, and… Malcolm cut her off abruptly. Things aren't what they seem with you. It's been 23 years and you're still the same slut. Okay, Malcolm, I can see that you're upset. I don't know why. It's not like I've never done anything bad to you. And tonight I just had a little fun, that's all. She explained curtly, as her own anger began to come out. Yeah, of course you did. That's fine then. I'm out of here, he replied angrily as he walked past her and her surprised companion. He had hoped she would say something, anything, but she pressed her lips into a thin line, narrowed her eyes, holding back an angry rant, and left him to have the last word. While it brought some comfort, it would have been much more satisfying if she had said something and he had been able to spew out more emotion. Damn it! I knew things were going to blow up with Jesse and me, but not like this, Malcolm cursed to himself as he left the bar. That bitch, lying whore. Malcolm wasn't sure who he meant, the whore at the bar or his wife. As he drove home, a storm raged inside him, the anger building with every mile he traveled until he was overcome with red-hot rage. It was about 10 o'clock by the time he pulled up in front of the house. Jesse's car wasn't there, which meant she wasn't home yet. It was a good thing he had something to think about. And right now, he didn't feel like looking at her at all. He entered the house, went into the living room, went to the cabinet where the bottle of Jack Daniels was kept, took it and a glass, then went into the living room, where he sat down in an armchair and drank, waiting for his dear wife to arrive. Half-finished thoughts raced through his mind, and he discarded each one as another took its place, all thoughts disappearing before he could consider them fully. Except for one. It came up again and again. Why did she have that pitying look in her eyes? Was it because of him? Or because of something still in the past? Malcolm, who was not a drinker, soon grew tipsy and felt slightly drowsy. He dozed off and woke only when he heard someone coming up the stairs. Since the den was partially under the stairs, the sound of footsteps on the wooden steps echoed in the den. He was still not drunk enough for what was ahead of him, but not wanting to drink anymore, Malcolm got up from his chair and went upstairs to meet his wife. He entered the bedroom. "When were you going to tell me?" Malcolm demanded, barely containing his rage. Startled by the sudden voice and its harshness, Jessie turned to Malcolm with her eyes wide open. Her face reflected shock and a hint of fear in her eyes. "What are you talking about, Malcolm?" she asked with a slight tremor in her voice. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. So don't pretend, and don't act like an idiot with me, Jessica." "Malcolm, I can't read minds. And until you explain to me what you're talking about, I'll have no idea what you mean," Jessie replied wryly, her initial surprise quickly turning to anger. "Okay, I'll explain it to you since you've decided to play this game. Tonight, tonight I saw Claire, your sister. Do you remember her?" "Oh." Jessie began with a surprise and relief that seemed suspiciously like relief to Malcolm. "Yeah, oh. How long ago did she come back?" "And why did she come back?" Malcolm demanded, raising his voice. "I didn't. Why didn't you ask her?" Jessie shouted back at him, and anger replaced her answer halfway through. And then it hit her. When and how had Malcolm seen her sister? And where were you when you ran into Claire? Caught off guard by the sudden change in tactics and wary of Jessica's obvious hostility, Malcolm hesitated for a moment before answering. Trying to keep himself from saying something he might regret, he replied more calmly but sharply, "I was outside having a few beers. Saw her in the same place." Malcolm had been drinking? Now that she thought about it, she could smell the whiskey from him. "You've been drinking? Since when?" Jessica asked, wondering what was going on with Malcolm. "Tonight, at some bar. Brewster's, then here at home," Malcolm replied, and then continued, "You're trying to change the subject, and I'd really appreciate an answer to my questions." Shaking her head in surprise, she looked at Malcolm, gazing into his eyes, trying to figure out what was behind his anger. Was there something more than just Claire's return to town that had upset him? For the first time in her life, she couldn't understand Malcolm. It was as if a stranger was looking at her. A shiver ran through her body, brought on by the realization that perhaps she didn't know her husband as well as she thought she did. And that was cause for concern. She threw him a hard stare that at other times would have made him cower and retreat, but this time she simply sputtered at his firm, unwavering gaze. He didn't utter a word, continuing to meet her, gaze unfazed, something he would never have done in the past. He would have lowered his eyes by now, a sheepish grin would have appeared on his face, and he would have laughed. But not this time. She really didn't know the man who stood across from her. It scared her, so she decided not to argue, but to answer. I'm sorry, Malcolm. I really don't know the answers to your questions. We haven't talked that much, but I found out a couple weeks ago that Claire was back. I asked her the same questions, but she was evasive. You can't let the past possess you. I know you're angry about what happened when she was still living here, but that was so long ago. We have to let it go." Then, in a slightly hurt tone, she added, "I thought we had already forgotten." He stared at her intently, studying her face and eyes, looking deeply into them, and then, emitting a grunt that could have meant anything, walked out of the bedroom. She'd seen Malcolm like this before, openly angry and hateful. It had been 23 years ago, only this time it was different. "It was like he didn't trust me," she said to herself. Anger flared up in her again, but it wasn't enough to overcome the uneasy feeling he'd left her with, and it frightened her. Good God, does he really know more than he's saying? Does he really know the truth and is testing me? To see what I'm going to say? And she realized that if that was the case, he knew she had lied through her teeth. Suddenly, she was very afraid of the man she loved and called her husband. Next chapter. "Hey boy, what's up, Mal?" one of the line technicians asked when he saw Malcolm walking down the line, inspecting the bright steel rollers and the safety screens around the gears and belts. Malcolm waved his hand, confirming that he had heard, but instead of stopping and chatting a bit as he usually did, he continued his inspection. "Dude, what's that guy's balls in a vice?" The technician who greeted Malcolm asked another technician standing nearby. Shrugging his shoulders, the second technician replied, "Who knows? But whatever it is, I've never seen an old man so focused on his work that he didn't stop for a minute." Yes, he must be. And the two technicians went back to their work, and the change in Malcolm's routine was quickly erased from his memory. Next chapter. "Okay, Bruce, I've walked the line, and from what I can see, everything is fine. We don't need any major repairs. Regular maintenance will get us through the summer. But just in case, have the maintenance guys order 2 more straight 8-foot sections, 1 double-sided spacer, and one right-side sweep. I think we'll be okay with that, Malcolm told his partner and longtime friend Eric Bruce. That's a good thing. The less we spend on repairs, the more we save, and the sooner we can start modernizing the plant. It's long overdue to get this done. We'll start next month, and I estimate it will be a year before we complete all the upgrades and repairs, Eric said. We're getting more orders than we can fulfill with our current capacity. And hiring more people doesn't make sense since the mechanicals are already running at capacity, Eric explained, more to himself than to Malcolm. You're right, Eric, but that means we'll have to hold off on going to market for another year, at least until we're sure everything is working properly. I understand, but we really have no choice. If we can't maintain current production and expand capacity by at least 3 times, we won't impress anyone, and our initial offering will remain so without buyers. We want to not only create demand but also make the initial price as high as possible, Eric said, stood up, walked from behind the table to the small counter where a large electric coffee maker stood, and poured himself a cup. Eric liked his coffee black from his days in the army, where he'd learned to make do with the occasional lack of sugar and cream. Malcolm, wary of Eric's coffee, as if it were poison, said, "Okay, I'll leave the business part to you and we'll do what you've already shown me." He'd known Eric since their days in the military, and in all that time he'd never gotten used to the fact that he drank his coffee black. It still made him cringe. This peculiarity of Eric's, as well as some of his other peculiarities, convinced Malcolm that Eric was just pretending to be civilized. After all, everyone knew that you had to add a little sugar to coffee to make it one of the truly great benefits of civilization. Great. Well, I have one more meeting with the bank, and I should be able to finish the financial report before then, Eric said, already back at his desk and typing away. Yeah, better you than me, old friend. I guess I'll head over to Jeremy Schneider's warehouse. He might have something we can use among all the junk he's accumulated. And as a rule, he doesn't need our firstborn, Malcolm said as he left Eric's office. Whatever Eric said in response was lost in the noise of the machines and other sounds that were part of the factory's operation. Next chapter. He talked to Schneider for a while, saw what he had for sale, and then negotiated like only real Southern guys know how to do. Not just throwing numbers around, but interweaving each of his offers and counter-offers with tall tales. These were laborious, often tedious negotiations. Weaker men would give up halfway through, agreeing to the last best offer, only to find that the item or items had reverted to their original price or, worse, were no longer available. None of the men gave any thought to the time spent haggling. That was the way it was and always had been. And so, as dusk turned a romantic purple velvet, he drove home. Jessica's car was parked in the driveway, which meant she didn't have to stay late at work today. That could be a good thing or a bad thing, but Malcolm wouldn't know until he walked into the house and saw what kind of mood his wife was in. Not that her mood mattered much, since his own mood had soured as soon as he saw her car. He was hoping to get some rest, get the paperwork sorted out, shower, and get into bed to sleep before she arrived. Not that he was a gambling man, but his father was, and he never bet on horses when Malcolm's mother was in a deceptively good mood. He entered the house through the kitchen, as it was the first place he liked to see when he came home. The front doors led to the sitting rooms and parlors, places that were almost always kept clean and decorous for company, especially unexpected company. The kitchen, on the other hand, was the heart of the house. It showed how things really were in the house at any given moment, and Malcolm liked to know the true nature of things. He went upstairs, but she wasn't in their bedroom or any of the other rooms. After standing at the window of one of the back bedrooms, he looked out into the backyard. Jessie was nowhere to be seen from his vantage point. Oh well, he thought. Looks like it's not going to be such a bad night. He shouldn't have been so angry with Jessie, but her sister Claire was one of the most deceitful and conniving women he'd ever met. And Jessie, perhaps because it was her sister, had once allowed Claire to manipulate her, nearly destroying their marriage. It had happened when they had first gotten married, the first year of wedded bliss, or so Malcolm had ignorantly thought. Claire was younger than Jessica by almost 8 years, but even then Claire had the strong-willed mind of a woman much older than her years. It had caused her family a lot of distress. But that day was the worst, and it was the last time he saw Claire. They were at Jessie's annual family party, and it was the first party Malcolm had attended as Jessie's husband. Sure, he'd been to a few before as her boyfriend, but still as a husband it had a deeper meaning and was more approving. So he had come to the family reunion with the pride of a husband and a certain artificial maturity. He socialized with Jesse's relatives, mostly male cousins and uncles and some older women. Jesse had left him early to go socialize with her relatives. Though he was aware of Claire's less than glowing reputation, he thought it was just a phase a young, opinionated woman went through before finding her center and settling down. As he passed the younger cousins huddled together, he heard them whispering loudly. Their words weren't quite clear amidst the other conversations going on around them, but he distinctly heard Jesse's name mentioned in the silence. It interested him, but feeling calm and confident, he stopped walking and moved closer, keeping his back to them so they wouldn't easily recognize him. Malcolm needn't have worried. The girls were so engrossed in their quiet conversation that he hadn't thought to look around to see if anyone was eavesdropping. He could hear them easily now, even over the other voices nearby. His hearing and consciousness seemed to be focused solely on their whispers. But it was just girl talk. Slightly amused by the girls' chatter, he was about to leave when something else came to his hearing. I swear that Claire girl is a total slut. Can you believe she actually involved her own sister in her plans? Yes, I can't believe it. Who would make their married sister agree to something like that? In unison, they all said with laughter, Claire. After a moment of mutual amusement, someone else spoke up. Where are they going to do it? One of the girls asked anxiously. By the old oak tree, I hear. But Claire might have said that to mislead us, and they might be down by the creek, said another girl with evident disgust at Claire's attempt at trickery. Are they really going to do that? A new voice asked. Yes, they are. I don't know how Claire talked Jessica into it, but they're really going to do it. What the hell are they talking about? Malcolm asked himself. Do what? Malcolm found himself wondering what kind of adventure Claire had gotten Jessica into. Jessica was her own person, but Malcolm knew that Claire was capable of charming a stinky skunk with just a slight raise of a manicured eyebrow. But whatever she was up to, he didn't want Jessica to take responsibility for her sister. Having heard more than enough, Malcolm looked around, orienting himself. He knew both places mentioned, and not just because he'd attended family gatherings for the past 4 years. He and Jesse had gotten out here more than once on their own, and he grinned involuntarily, remembering the reason for their independent trip. The land belonged to Jesse's grandfather, but it was open to all family members at any time. He and Jesse had taken advantage of that open invitation more than once. Trying to muffle a smirk, Malcolm went in search of his wayward wife and troublesome daughter-in-law. They were nowhere to be found at the oak tree, and Malcolm, impatiently hurrying his steps, began walking toward the creek that flowed lazily about a mile from the oak tree. He was absorbed in the nature walk. His mind was calm and enjoying thoughts of Jesse and himself, so he paid no attention to what his ears were hearing until he was almost at the creek. Then he suddenly heard someone's voice. Come on, baby, I need you. Give it to me. I've been waiting for this the longest. It was Claire's voice. But who was that with her? The voice was male, but inaudible. Well, it was none of his business what Claire did with whoever she wanted. But how is Jesse involved? Not wanting to spy on his sister-in-law and her lover, Malcolm began to quietly move away from them. And then, Jessica, you've got to get over it, girl. He won't do anything unless you do it first. Your shitty husband won't know anything anyway. Just hurry up so we can get back before he notices your absence. What the hell? Malcolm shouted, and all thoughts of rationality vanished in a momentary haze of anger. Instead of taking a step back, he switched to a sprint. Tearing through the thick brush that grew along the creek, Malcolm burst upon a scene that was forever imprinted on his memory. The first person he saw was Claire. She was standing on top of some guy lying on the ground. Off to the side, a few feet away from her, was Jesse, sitting on another guy's lap. What the hell? God damn you, you goddamn bitch! And you miserable bastard! Everyone could see the red rage on his face and the burning fury in his eyes, and they didn't doubt for a second that his furious screams were untrue. Next chapter. Jessica! Jessica! Wait! Wait! Shouted her friend Phyllis as Jesse walked out of the drugstore. Jessica stopped and turned toward the screaming woman. Phyllis practically jogged up to Jessica and, panting, said, I'm so glad I caught you. I was going to call you, but I've been so busy. Hi, Phyllis. Are you okay? Is Henry okay? The kids? Jessica asked with concern in her voice. Yeah, Henry's fine. Well, you know Henry. Same old Henry. If he's not at work sitting on his ass, he's at home in front of the damn TV sitting on his ass. The kids are doing good. Junior just got promoted to assistant manager and transferred to another store that will be his own very soon. And Virginia is 5 months along, 4 more to go, and I'll be a grandmother again, squeaked Phyllis with childish delight. Oh, that's all very nice. But you didn't yell my name across the parking lot to tell me about Henry's butt, or that Junior's a big wig, and that Virginia's going to pop out another one, did you? Oh, no. No, Phyllis grinned, looking at Jessica's obvious irritation. I just wanted to tell you, well, that I saw Mel at Brewster's the other night. Before you get any wild thoughts, he was alone, sitting and drinking. Alone, Phyllis explained with an expectant expression on her shining face. Is everything all right between you two lovebirds? Jessica stared at her friend for a moment before answering. Yes, everything is fine. It's very nice of you to ask. You're an evil bitch, Jessica added quietly. Oh, okay. I just wanted to ask because he's also… Phyllis began. I'm sorry, Phyllis. I'm in a hurry. We'll talk later. Jessica interrupted before Phyllis could finish whatever she was going to say. Before Phyllis could respond, Jessica turned and walked away. Even then, Phyllis had time to say goodbye. I heard Mel talking to Claire. Just thought you should know. Jessie could hear the glee in Phyllis's voice, which irritated her beyond belief. Jessie and Phyllis had become friends back in high school, but as each of them quickly realized, they were both very competitive. Although their rivalry remained friendly, there were times when the argument would get so heated that they would briefly fight. Jessie knew that to Phyllis, their marriages were just another competition. In an era when divorce was the rule, any couple whose marriage lasted more than a few years was considered abnormal, and, therefore, fair game for rivals. For the same reason, everyone in their neighborhood knew that Phyllis would never divorce Henry, no matter what he did. However, that didn't stop Phyllis from leaving the house from time to time. Turning on her heel, Jessie looked back at Phyllis and flipped back her long hair and said, Thank you for telling me, dear. However, I want to ask you if Mel saw you at Brewster's sitting alone. You know my husband. He's truthful to the bone and can't stand anyone running around him. Oh, but I'm sure you don't have any worries when Mel and Henry are talking, because you must have been all alone, just like Mel. Smiling like the Cheshire Cat, Jessica turned away and walked away, but not before seeing Phyllis blush and then worry and anger appear on her face. Phyllis might not pursue a divorce, but that didn't mean Henry wouldn't. That thought made Jessica smile even wider and even more venomously. If Jessie could hear what Phyllis was whispering under her breath, she might not be so smug. You're a goddamn bitch. I know what and who you've been up to. Maybe Mel will find out soon, too. Next chapter. Malcolm went back to Brewster's place. He didn't know if Jessie was home, but if she was, he didn't want her to be. Yesterday's encounter had been beyond him. Something about Jessie's behavior had made him suspicious, ringing alarm bells. Her whole demeanor was both very strange and vaguely familiar at the same time. A questioning thought suddenly popped into his mind, one that Malcolm would have found distressing. Is Jessica really cheating? The silent denial that automatically lashed out was a lukewarm response. Somehow, his subconscious mind had already dotted all the points, and his conscious mind was only catching up. Malcolm couldn't cite a single specific instance, but all the little things taken together indicated that… Damn it! What have you done, Jessie? Malcolm's mind screamed. A waitress carrying a tray of empty plates stopped in front of him. Hey, here again? It's good to see you again, honey. What can I get you? Interrupting his musings, Malcolm noticed that it was the same waitress from the night before. A slow smile spread across his face at the sincerity he heard in her voice. The same? Malcolm asked, wanting to know if she remembered what he had ordered last night. You got it. I'll be back with 2 beers, she replied with a laugh. Still smiling, Malcolm looked around the bar. But again, it was still early and the bar was relatively quiet. The same men he had seen yesterday were sitting in the same spot. They had been talking animatedly when he walked in, but toned it down as he passed them. In one booth, a couple was sitting and talking quietly. He couldn't recall seeing them last night. There was a woman sitting in one of the booths, but Malcolm couldn't make her out as it was a little dark in that part of the bar. He walked over to the same table as before and sat down. As he waited for the waitress to bring his beer, he pondered his situation for a while and became so engrossed in his thoughts that he didn't notice the woman who slowly approached his table. "May I join you, Malcolm?" Surprised by the sudden address to him by name, Malcolm popped his head up. "Claire. What the hell do you want?" Sighing, Claire replied, "Just to talk. That's all. Just to talk." "I have nothing to say to you, and I'm sure you don't want to hear anything, so just leave, Claire," Malcolm said stiffly. "I'll leave as soon as you hear me out," Claire said defiantly. "I said no." "What part of that didn't you understand?" replied an increasingly frustrated Malcolm. "Listen, you ignorant, pompous Neanderthal. You chased me out of town once, but that was a long time ago, and I'm not so easily intimidated anymore. If you're not listening to what I have to say, then—" Claire began hotly. "Damn it! Damn it! If it's not your sister, it's her friend. And now it's you. What is it with women? All you can do is stir up shit," Malcolm exclaimed loudly, his patience breaking and his frustration turning to anger. "Why can't you leave me alone? You've been doing this for over 20 years. What's another 20 years, huh?" Claire stared at Malcolm, her hot eyes burning with anger. "I was 17 years old. 17 years, you damn piece of shit. Ever since you saved their precious daughter, every word out of your mouth was like gospel to my parents. Everything you said was taken on faith. Eventually, I had to leave home, to live in a home for girls. I had no choice. I was scared that things were out of control. So I never fought back. Well, buddy, that scared little girl is long gone. Also, thanks to you, I've been robbed of any chance of inheritance. When my parents died, the only thing I got was a copy of their death certificate." Claire stopped her tirade to catch her breath. Malcolm was stunned by both Claire's rage and her words, and for a moment was at a loss for words. He hadn't realized that her parents had taken her somewhere. Malcolm had always assumed that Claire had run away. Jesse had even encouraged that opinion. "And another thing, what I do and who I do it with is my business. You got that, brain shit? My business, not yours, and nobody else's but mine. So no righteous talk about my business here." At this point, the waitress came over with Malcolm's beer, saying sweetly, "Here you go, sweetie." Turning to Claire, the barmaid asked, "What can I get you?" Her voice was clearly flattering as she addressed Claire. Claire looked at the unsuspecting waitress with hatred. "Nothing, bitch." "Not—" Malcolm quickly interrupted his sister-in-law before she kicked them both out, saying, "She can have one of my beers, and bring me the other one, please." With those words, he handed the waitress a $20 bill, telling her to keep the change. With a raised eyebrow, the waitress took the money, smiled at Malcolm, and said she'd be back soon with another beer. "I don't want you to," Claire said, but Malcolm spoke up. "Sit down, Claire. Mind your manners before we get kicked out. And drink that damn beer," Malcolm ordered, reaching for his mug. Following his order, Malcolm took a big gulp and looked at Claire. "Well, are you just going to stand there like that? If you look around, you'll see everyone is looking that way. I think they're waiting for another flash of you." Claire noticed the silence in the room and, slightly embarrassed by the unwanted attention, sat down but didn't reach for the bottle of beer. Noticing his expectant look, Claire said curtly, "I'm not going to drink with you." Shrugging, Malcolm said, "Suit yourself." After a moment of anxious silence, having calmed down, or rather accepted his fate, Malcolm asked, "So speak. What did you want to say before?" Claire frowned and asked incredulously, "Now you want to talk?" "Talk or don't talk, Claire. I don't care one way or the other," said Malcolm, relieved, taking another sip of beer. When Claire still didn't answer, Malcolm explained, "I didn't know what happened to you. The only thing Jessie said was that you decided to go off on your own and live with some aunt. I believed her. So either you're lying, or Jessie and your folks have been lying all these years. Which is it?" "Screw you," Claire hissed through tightly clenched teeth. God, what a filthy mouth you have. Is that supposed to have any effect on me?" Malcolm asked. "This is your last chance to talk, Claire. As soon as I finish this beer, I'm leaving." Having said that, he tipped the bottle back and drank until there was very little left. The silence continued until Malcolm picked up the bottle and finished its contents. Carefully setting the bottle back down, he pushed back his chair and stood up. "Wait." Claire spoke up loud enough for Malcolm to hear her. I think there's something you need to know. He sat back down. Okay, I'm all ears. Claire looked around the room, then picked up her beer and took a sip. I don't know how to sugarcoat it, so I'll just say it. Jesse's cheating on you. Malcolm sat, blinking his eyes rapidly as his sister-in-law's words rolled around in his head. Okay. Claire's eyes widened in surprise. That's all you have to say? Good? What else was I supposed to say? I don't know, but something more than good. Don't you care? At this point, a waitress whizzed past, set his beer in front of him, and left back to the bar. It was obvious from her silence and quick departure that she wanted no part of the two men's argument. Grabbing the bottle, Malcolm took a loud sip. Do I care? I think you do. The only thing is, I only have your word that she's cheating. Do you have proof? Claire looked at Malcolm for a moment before answering. No, I don't. Claire still had her beer in her hand and took another sip while keeping her eyes on her brother-in-law. Just her words. What, you mean Jesse told you she was cheating? Just like that? Nodding, Claire replied. Yes. Leaning back in his chair, Malcolm slowly shook his head as if trying to clear it of what he had just heard. When did you talk to Jessie? When she told you she was cheating? Sipping her beer, Claire frowned slightly in thought before answering. A couple weeks ago. I don't remember the exact day. It was probably Monday or Tuesday. We were having lunch and I knew right away that something was wrong with her. After all, she is my sister. So I pressed her until she relented. Before you ask for details, she didn't tell me much. Just that she was having an affair. Grunting as if he'd been punched, Malcolm stared grimly at Claire. What? Why are you looking at me like that? I told you because I thought you should know. She's my sister, but I'm not going to take the blame again. What do you mean? Malcolm asked in an even voice. What do I mean? Claire asked in an impatient tone. That you're not going to take the blame on yourself again? She's cheated on me before? Claire took a sip of her beer and looked at Malcolm. Shrugging, she replied, Don't you know? Why do you think I was forced to leave? It wasn't just your complaints. Jessica also insisted that my folks send me away. She was afraid I would blab. Pauses to sip another drink. I thought you'd have figured it out by now. Shaking his head, Malcolm asked, What are you talking about now? What was I supposed to understand? Eyes wide, Claire stared at him for several seconds. Oh my God, you really don't understand. You didn't know. You don't understand. Just answer me. Has Jess cheated on me up to this point? Suddenly, Claire's eyes softened and she said in a low voice, I'm sorry, Malcolm. It probably wasn't the best idea. Grabbing her purse, she stood up. I'd better go. Malcolm stared after the departing Claire as she made her way through the crowd of bar patrons. Standing up, Malcolm followed his sister-in-law just as she was walking out the door. Claire! Malcolm shouted, rushing to catch up with the brunette who was his sister-in-law. Wait! Claire ignored Malcolm's demand and pressed the key fob, reaching her car. She tried to run away. She didn't know what she was doing at the bar. She shouldn't have tried to talk to Malcolm. She honestly thought Malcolm would realize the stupid things his wife had done all these years. No sooner had she entered the car than his hand closed on her arm like a steel vise. Wait a minute, Claire. You can't tell me about Jesse and just walk away. You still haven't answered my question. What's going on? Malcolm demanded sharply. Let me go. I have to go, Claire pleaded. Not until you tell me what's going on. If Jess cheated on me before, I need to know. I have a right to know. Claire looked hesitantly at Malcolm before making a decision. With a vengeance for years of held-back emotions, she exploded. Fine. You want both barrels? I'll give them to you straight. Yes, she cheated. She cheated on you that day at the family gathering and kept cheating until Ian moved out. Whose idea do you think it was to sneak out? I agreed to do it because she promised me I could get Ian's friend. When you caught us, that's exactly what I did. Shocked by the cruelty of his sister-in-law's words, Malcolm could only stare at her in amazement. Barely able to catch her breath, Claire continued, unable to stop herself. Speaking the vile truth she'd kept to herself for far too long. Do you want more than that? There's a good chance your children aren't yours. Does it quench your curiosity? Does it satisfy your righteous need? You're lying. You're just jealous of your sister, Malcolm objected loudly, unable to believe what Claire was claiming. But in the back of his mind, he could feel Malcolm's suspicions gaining strength and slowly flaring up, turning from a naked coal to a flickering flame. He didn't want to believe it. He couldn't believe what Claire had said. It meant admitting something he couldn't face, something he didn't want to face. Seeing the abrupt change in his eyes despite his words, Claire felt a sudden sadness for a man she hadn't known well, but had spent years imagining and rejoicing in this very encounter. The pleasure she would have felt at his pain was tempered by the fact that he was as much a victim of her sister's whims as herself. "I'm sorry, Malcolm. I didn't mean to. I have to go." With a burst of hysterical energy, she pulled out of his embrace and jumped into the car. As she drove away, she saw him standing there, looking after her with a blank expression on his face. No, not so much indifferent as lost, like a little boy who has been abandoned in a strange place to his fate. Barely audible, Claire whispered, "I'm sorry." She wasn't sure if she was apologizing for herself, or for Malcolm, or for both of them. Next chapter. Malcolm realized his surroundings, or rather, he knew where he was, how he got there. But up until this point, he didn't care. Not that he cared much even now, but his brain was trying to at least give the appearance of concern. This was the dirtiest part of the city. It was full of empty, dilapidated houses, boarded-up buildings, cracked sidewalks, and trash-strewn roads. Small groups of people huddled here and there in dark sections of the once busy streets. There were a few more hardy individuals who moved from place to place alone, and no doubt those who moved were heavily armed. On the whole, the atmosphere was gloomy, suggestive of foreboding desolation, and subconsciously darker than dusk is supposed to be. Without giving much thought to his well-being, Malcolm slowed his truck and parked at the crumbling curb. Starting the engine, Malcolm rested his head on the steering wheel, trying to quiet his troubled thoughts and calm his wounded heart. Was Claire telling the truth? Had Jess been deceived all these years? Were Trisha and Jackson other people's children? Each of these agonizing questions and more swarmed endlessly, falling into the bottomless depths of his tortured soul, only to rise again and again to fill his confused mind. Nothing answered his call for truth. Light memories came, which individually had no meaning, but when gathered together, made his suspicions more and more intense. Did his so-called friends know anything? If so, would they admit it? Would they answer his questions, or would they evade them with a shameful and guilty look? To whom might he turn? For years, Malcolm had relied on his friends as they had on him. But could he trust them now? No, he couldn't trust his friends. And this was an unexpected discovery for Malcolm. He was at a loss, feeling a deep sadness and bitterness like he had never felt before. His thoughts kept returning to his business partner, Eric. Could he talk to Eric about this? And in fact, did Eric know anything? Malcolm normally kept personal problems out of business, and because of his connection to Eric, it concerned him. Still, Malcolm had no choice. He needed to talk to someone. He needed to find out if his friends knew about everything from the beginning. No sooner had he shifted the transmission into drive than there was a loud, brittle thud in his left ear. Turning around to see who was tapping on the window pane, he saw 3 young men. They were dressed in dark clothing, but in a style that was popular these days. Their odd, irregularly shaped caps were skewed and turned sideways. They were all wearing clothes of similar colors, which alerted Malcolm. Perhaps these people were in a gang. He noticed that all of them were clutching automatic pistols that seemed too big, which dangled loosely at their sides. Great. They crept up on him as he sat there, immersed in his thoughts. Malcolm should have felt fear. He knew his life was in danger and at the mercy of the whims of these strangers. Yet he felt a strange exhilaration. The adrenaline rushing into his veins was spreading rapidly throughout his body. His mind slowed down, turning the events into a slowed reality. He felt his right hand reach for the automatic pistol and grabbed it. He snatched it up and raised it in one smooth motion. As he reached for the weapon, his other hand touched the driver's door window switch, which automatically lowered the glass quickly. He didn't know what to do as his body and mind acted on their own. As the howl of the window motor died down, the gun rose and came into view of all 3 of them. "Hey guys, I had a really bad night. I need to blow off some steam, a lot of steam. You're all going to help me out. What will you do?" Their surprise was complete and utter. They expected to see a scared, helpless cracker, and what they got was an armed and enraged redneck. "I'll kick your ass," exclaimed the nearest young man, with what appeared to Malcolm to be false bravado as he began to raise his gun. "Please, let's do it," replied Malcolm with an eerie but quiet pleasantness. "Yo, Drydell, he's serious, man. I've seen that look in some of the brothers' eyes. He's crazy. Let's get out of here." "Screw you! Drydell ain't running from nobody, especially not an old cracker," Drydell shouted. The deafening sound of a shot from an automatic pistol added to Drydell's shout. The gun that the young man named Drydell was holding flew past the other two men and fell into the street. Drydell's hand twitched. "Oh shit," shouted one of Drydell's aides. "I told you he was crazy." "Drydell, huh? I'm not one to give second chances, so if you value any part of your life, do as your friend says and walk away. The next shot will be a kill shot." Malcolm's gaze changed dramatically. It became as cold as liquid helium and his face poured with rage. This did not go unnoticed. The consternation in his friend's voice made Drydell look up. The old dude had changed, and Drydell realized he was no longer the calm and inhibited asshole. Drydell uncomplainingly allowed his friends to pull him back, away from the old man. He kept looking around, expecting that at any moment the gun might go off. As his two friends dragged Drydell across the street into the shadows, he thought about shouting a threat at the old man, but one look extinguished that desire. The man's face blazed with hatred, and the gun didn't move, didn't quiver or waver. It was still pointed confidently at Drydell. Drydell didn't know who this old dude was, but he was going to find out and then pay him a visit. As if reading his friend's mind, he exclaimed, "Dre, leave that old cracker alone. He'll put you in the ground if you don't." I saw the look in his eyes. He's not playing. "Whatever makes him angry, we came at the wrong time, and he won't forget us," pleaded his friend. "This cracker is no good." Next chapter. Hearing the ringing of the doorbell, followed a few seconds later by a loud, incessant knocking on the front door, Eric jumped out of bed, grabbed his 9mm automatic pistol, and approached the door warily. When he looked through the peephole, he saw his business partner and friend standing there, and immediately his wariness was replaced by irritation. But at the same time, he realized that Malcolm wouldn't try to kick down his door unless it was about something very important. "Mal, what are you doing here at this hour? Is everything okay? Did something happen to Jessica?" a worried Eric asked. "Did something happen to Jessica? You could put it that way. Do you mind if I come in?" "I'm sorry. Sure, come on in." "What's going on, Mel?" "Do you have anything to drink? A beer would be nice," Malcolm asked hopefully, ignoring Eric's question. Critically looking over Mal and deciding that his friend wasn't drunk, Eric nodded. "I think we are. Let's go to the kitchen. Maybe you'd prefer coffee." Remembering Eric making coffee, Malcolm quickly declined the offer. "Thanks, but no thanks. Beer will suffice." "Settle in yourself." Settling himself at the kitchen table with a beer in hand, Malcolm looked around the kitchen. "I hadn't noticed before, but you have a beautiful kitchen." "Thanks. Now cut the crap. What's going on? Are you and Jessica having problems? Did she kick you out?" Taking a sip from his mug of beer, a rather refined one that Malcolm had never tasted before, but tasted better than he had expected, he explained what Claire had told him. Before Eric could express his displeasure, Malcolm added something else. "And here's the other thing. I destroyed a guy tonight." "You did what?" Eric exclaimed in utter amazement. "Did you shoot someone? Why? Is that the guy who—" "No, it's not him that Jess is messing around with. At least I don't think so." At Eric's urging, Malcolm recounted what had happened. "Shit, Mal. What if the guy goes to the police? I'm sure they got your truck's license plate number." Taking one last sip of the excellent beer, Malcolm shrugged. "I don't think he'll go to the police. He doesn't seem like the kind of man who wants the police involved in this case." Eric stood up and walked over to the refrigerator to get 2 more bottles. "Well, maybe so, but what if he comes after you?" "Eric, in all the time you've known me, have you ever known me to be afraid of something like this?" "No, but that's exactly what I'm talking about. What if he comes after you?" Eric started to say, but Malcolm intervened. "Then I'll kill the bastard." "And you'll end up killing him?" finished Eric after Malcolm's threat. You're looking at years in prison. Yeah, maybe so, Malcolm agreed in an indifferent tone. Sighing, he said thoughtfully, You know what? I think I'll pass on that second beer. I'm going home and to bed. Thanks for listening. You're a good buddy. As Malcolm got up, a thought occurred to Eric. Hey kid, why don't you spend the night here? It's a long drive back to your house and you look tired. What do you say? Malcolm looked at his friend. Yes, he was tired, and he'd probably had too much to drink to stay within the legal limit. The offer was tempting, but no, he would feel better if he was in his own home. Thank you for the offer, Eric. I appreciate it, but I need to get home. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, just don't do anything stupid. Don't do anything bad, Jess. Okay? I know what you're like, Mal. That damn temper of yours will take over one day. Smiling sadly, Malcolm gave his friend a brotherly pat on the shoulder and walked out of the kitchen. Eric followed a moment later, but Malcolm had already left the house and closed the front door behind him. As he set the locks, Eric pondered how much Malcolm's dissolution of his marriage would affect his friend. Early on, when he and Malcolm had started their business, Eric had heard rumors about Jessica's wanderings. He paid no attention to the gossip until he saw Jessica and a strange man walking through the parking lot of an exclusive condominium. They stopped so the man could swipe the access card unlocking the main doors and then entered the middle tower of 3 buildings. Their arms went around each other's waist. After 12 years of doing business with Malcolm and dealing with Jessica, Eric had no doubt what his eyes saw and who his brain recognized. It didn't take a great imagination to guess the intentions of Jessica and her escort. It disturbed Eric greatly, and he tried more than once to tell Malcolm what he had seen. Each time he was held back by what everyone in town thought would happen if Malcolm found out about his wife's infidelity. The cheating wife and her lover are dead, and the enraged husband is in jail. That's why he erupted with worry when he saw Malcolm at his door. It was why he'd immediately asked if Jessica was okay. He'd feared the worst. Now that the cat was out of the bag, it appeared that Malcolm had succumbed to his nature and it was only a matter of time. Eric had never met Claire. He'd heard of her but didn't know her, so it surprised him how much he'd come to hate the woman in a matter of minutes. Next chapter. The drive home was a haze of agonizing, conflicting thoughts, and as he drove into his house, Malcolm couldn't remember how he'd gotten there. The house was dark. The driveway was empty, which meant Jess wasn't home, and at this late hour she probably wouldn't be back tonight. It's for the best, Malcolm thought. It's unlikely I'd be able to meet her gaze and not want to destroy her. With heavy footsteps, slumped shoulders, and ragged breathing, Malcolm entered his house and began to prepare for bed. He was tired to the bone. Despite the unsolicited, soul-crushing pain, his body needed rest, and he didn't care about anything else, including how much his heart hurt. His last thoughts before sleep overtook him were wild and full of emotion. Is she with him? If so, I hope I catch them together. I will destroy them. Next chapter. What? You told him? How could you? Damn you, Claire. All you do is ruin my life. Jessica lashed out at her sister. They met for lunch at a deli inside the town's only shopping center. Claire, experiencing a kind of perverse pleasure, had laid out the details to her sister without any warning. Up to this point, they had been having a rather pleasant conversation, but when Jess began extolling the virtues of her lover, Claire grew bored. Yes, dear sister, I told him. I told him everything. Everything. And as for me ruining your life, well, welcome to my world. It's the same thing you and Malcolm did to me. I was 17 years old. I was ripped from the only home I knew. And the very people who were supposed to love me and care for me wanted nothing to do with me. I lived in that horrible home for girls for a month before I ran away. I had to learn to live on the streets. Twice I was almost killed. Jessica's eyebrows went up in shock and concern. I didn't know. What happened? What happened? What happened? Claire asked sarcastically, her anger building. Then, making a visible effort on herself, she calmed down, letting out a short sigh. Does it really matter? It was a long time ago and I'd rather not remember. Okay? Jess nodded uncertainly, though her face grew calmer. I'm alive. That's the important thing, right? Jessica nodded again, her anger muted for a moment by her sister's story. "Look, Jess, you brought this on yourself," said Claire quietly. "I don't know what you have with that creep Ian, but it has to stop. I don't like Malcolm much, but I'm told he's been a good husband to you and a good father to your children. And unless things have changed, you know how Malcolm can be when he feels he's been lied to." A look of extreme surprise appeared on Jessica's face, turning to fear and dread at the implications her sister had hinted at. Claire replied with a sardonic smile, sadistically pleased with herself. "Yes, I know they don't belong to Malcolm." Then, tightening the screws even more, she added, "Are you wondering how I know? Easy. Ian has a big mouth. The only reason this news didn't reach Malcolm's ears sooner is because the people Ian was bragging to know about Malcolm's temper. They don't want to be the messenger who gets crucified for delivering bad news." Jessica's mouth folded into an O of disbelief. "No. Tell me you didn't tell him about the children. Please, even you can't be that cruel." Leaning forward and moving closer to her sister, Claire said in a stern tone, "Cruel? Maybe. But yes, I did tell Malcolm about your children's origins." "Oh my God, why did you do that? I thought you and I, we," Jessica began, but she was cut short by an angry Claire. "We? We what? You thought all was forgiven and forgotten? That we had reached some level of understanding? I'm begging you. Even you can't be so naive." "Right, dear little sister?" exclaimed Claire with utter contempt for her blood relative. Looking carefully at Jessica's pale face, Claire was surprised in turn. Leaning back in her chair, she said, "Damn, you really thought the past was behind us and we were suddenly the loving sisters we could and should have been?" For a few moments, both women fell into silence as each sat and pondered their thoughts. "Jess, I didn't come back to ruin your life. Really, I didn't. It wasn't until you brought up Ian that I lost my head. Ian this, Ian that. The same asshole you wanted the first time. The same asshole who thought it was so much fun to send me away. It was too much. I snapped. I was furious," said Claire, her voice rising. Taking a pause, Claire thought for a moment to calm herself down, while Jessica continued to be resentfully silent. "Despite all this, I still had a couple friends in town. They kept me in the loop on everything, including your shameful adventures. So yes, I knew all about who the father of your children was. Ian is such an asshole, he couldn't keep anything quiet. Luckily, the people he bragged to were smarter or had better survival instincts because, amazingly, not a single word had reached Malcolm's ears in all those years. He was in complete ignorance." "Until you told him," Jessica remarked bitterly. "Yes. The poor guy didn't really believe me, but he was still at a loss for words. Whether he believes me or not, the seed of doubt has already been planted. I'm sure he knows what to do with it," Claire said with a snide chuckle. "Do you really hate me that much? Do you hate children that much?" Jessica asked pitifully. "Hate you?" Claire asked, surprised by the question. "Not anymore. I used to hate you. And I certainly don't hate your children. But for years I harbored a great deal of hatred for you. I used that hatred to keep me warm when I was cold, to feed me when I was hungry, to keep me alive when I should have died. I used her to get me through the worst moments of those years. She drove me relentlessly. She motivated me to accomplish many things, to do things I never dreamed of, and to succeed beyond my wildest dreams. But I'm not sure exactly when, probably a few years ago, I realized that hatred had dissipated." Jessica looked at her sister and saw a coldness in her hazel eyes that hadn't been there before. She shuddered. A shiver traveled down her spine, down her legs, and reached her toes. Her feet were slightly numb and tingling. "For all that, I'm furious with you. If you had just kept your gigolo out of our conversations, I never would have said anything. The mere mention of his name brings me back to those horrible moments in the past, and I go crazy thinking about it. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize—" "I'm sorry, Jessica hesitantly began, unconvincingly apologizing. "Save it for the priest, my sister. There's nothing you can say to undo what you've done to me and, yes, to Malcolm too. He's a blind fool, but he's a man who mistakenly worshipped the very seat your stinking ass sat on. So I feel sorry for him. He fell for your lies and deceit, just like our parents did. I hated them too. So did Malcolm. I don't hate anybody now. I have my own life, and it's better than most. Pushing her chair back, Claire stood up abruptly and said with a definitive look, "Lunch is on me." Jessica, unable to look at her sister, stared at her food, already cold, and nodded in appreciation. Claire stood behind Jessica, then leaned in close to her sister's ear and said quietly, almost in a whisper, "I didn't cause these problems. I just brought them out into the open. What happens next is up to you and Malcolm. I'm leaving tonight and I'm not coming back. So it's not au revoir, it's adieu." Jessica, gripped by a range of conflicting emotions, couldn't bring herself to face her sister or even react in any way to her leaving. She was angry, very angry at what Claire had done, but at the same time faintly aware that her own actions had led to this outcome. Minutes passed, she cried silently, and her incoherent thoughts tried to line up to make some kind of coherence. But suddenly, instant knowledge flashed through her mind, and Jessica realized what she had to do. Next chapter. "What do you want?" yelled Malcolm, at the man who had once been the love of his life. "I said, I want a divorce. I know it's not what you want, but," Jessica began, facing her husband. Blushing and shaking with intense anger like a giant sequoia tree caught in the epicenter of an earthquake, Malcolm forced himself to calm down as Jessica spoke. "You don't know what I want. You haven't known what I want for a long time because I realized you don't know me," Malcolm replied, interrupting his wife at a volume just below a roar. "In the same way, I don't know you anymore. I thought I did, but I guess I was wrong." "Please, Malcolm, if you love me, please," Jessica pleaded, but she was interrupted again. "Love you? You've got to be kidding me. After what you did? I'm surprised I don't hate you even more than I do now. I never have and never will love a whore. And that's exactly what you are, Jessica. A goddamn whore." "Malcolm, how can you say that? I can—" Jessica shrieked, shocked, pain audible in her voice. "Listen, you slut. I'll decide what I'm going to do, not you. Do you understand? If I want a divorce, I'll do it. If I want to stay married and make your life a living hell, well, I'll do it. If you try to resist whatever I decide, I'll drop a ton of shit on you and your lover." "But Malcolm," she began, then noticed his eyes. They were filled with raw, unyielding hatred. There was pain in them, and a mixture of other emotions, but the brightest of them all was hatred. It glittered in his eyes, making them shimmer with a shimmering heat that made her heart grow vaguely but suffocatingly uncomfortable. As she shifted her gaze to his face, she saw the deep features, fierce, with an unrelenting, grim expression, and she realized everything. Malcolm wasn't just mouthing words. He meant every syllable he uttered. A vague memory flashed through her mind. Of another place in another time. The memory quickly took on a strange, cloying solidity. She was with her sister, and they were with two men when an enraged Malcolm popped out of the bushes. "What the hell, goddamn you, bitch, and you miserable bastard." Then, as now, those words pierced her consciousness. She heard in his shout a tremendous rage and an infinite depth of pain. Before she could even turn in surprise to look at her husband, she realized what she would see. He was bearing down on them. Before Jessica could jump aside, he was upon them both. Something hard hit her in the head. She fell to the ground, though not unconscious. She was badly stunned. She then saw Malcolm dragging someone to the creek, where he dunked them head first into the flowing water several times. It was Ian. "Ian. Oh my God, Malcolm, you destroyed him," came a voice full of disbelief and horror. It was Claire's voice. For some reason, Jessica had forgotten the details of that day. In the days that followed, during her recovery, she buried that memory deeply, and though she sometimes felt the tickle of its presence, it never manifested itself until that very moment when she stared at Malcolm's frozen face. Ian, who had been rescued in time by Claire and Ian's friends, had been taken to the same hospital as Jessica, but fear prevented them from contacting each other. Although the police were investigating, Malcolm's name was never mentioned. If it had, and the true circumstances of the incident had come to light, Jessica and Ian would have been run out of town by her family. So by pure coincidence, both Jessica and Ian explained that it was a swimming accident. Despite the complete inconsistency of their stories, the police believed them because their stories, due to the difference in details, were quite expected in such a traumatic experience. After Jessica was released from the hospital, A silent Malcolm came to pick her up and took them to her parents' house. Malcolm told her father that she was done, that she was back in her parents' care. Jessica was blatantly lying. She blamed it all on her sister and even hinted that she had been drugged until she became delirious from the alcohol and succumbed to Ian's entreaties, helped by Claire. It took a lot of effort and pleading, with her parents acting as intermediaries, but eventually Malcolm agreed to take her back. It took even more time, years, before he forgave her, and their relationship was back on track. It was even more time before Jessica started listening to Ian and started a relationship with him again. Naturally, Ian, despite his fear of Malcolm, wanted to get back at him in any way he could for the blow Malcolm had dealt him and the near drowning. And what better way than to entertain this man's wife, or better yet, get her pregnant? And not once, but twice. And all without Malcolm knowing. For Jessica, all of this had been going on for a while, long enough for her to get used to it and even come to terms with it. And then Claire had come back, entered the picture and turned it all around. Now that she was facing the man she had once loved, all her deceptions and long-held secrets came crashing down on her all at once. Shame, guilt, regret, all overwhelmed her, almost overwhelmed her, and she realized she couldn't go on living with her husband, nor could she live with the deception. Jessica turned away from Malcolm, unable to bear his piercing gaze any longer. He already knew about some of her deceptions, but something else in his eyes seemed to penetrate deep into her soul. She was afraid he would see the rest if she continued to meet his gaze. "All right, Malcolm. I'll wait for your decision. I'll leave it up to you however you choose to proceed. I'll go along with whatever it is," a disappointed Jessica muttered. After waiting a moment, Malcolm replied, "What? I'm getting old, and my hearing isn't so good anymore. What did you say?" Jessica was pierced by a flash of anger. Malcolm was toying with her. His hearing was better than ever. But she had no choice but to agree with him. She feared this was only the beginning of a long and dangerous game. A change was coming that Jessica had never foreseen, never expected, but which was rapidly looming over her. "I'll go along with whatever you decide, okay?" Jessica said in a louder but strained voice. Nodding, Malcolm raised his hand and pointed his finger at the door, saying rather calmly, "Get out. I'll let you." "What? I need some things, Malcolm. My clothes. My makeup. Please." "I need my—" exclaimed a frightened Jessica. "I don't care. Go away. Now." "I'll call you when I decide what to do," said Malcolm, in a voice colder than the Arctic wind. "Someone else can pick up your stuff later and take it to you." Jessica knew she wasn't going to get anywhere with Malcolm. She could force herself to walk past him, but in the state he was in, he might just lose control and hurt her. Or worse. Thank Claire and your own stupidity for getting you into this story. And damn that Ian. His stupidity was of a special kind. No common sense. But you agreed with everything he said, didn't you? And how stupid are you compared to him? Jessica thought to herself. Reluctantly, but resigned to the situation, Jessica sighed, and a slight shiver ran through her body in response to giving in to Malcolm's demand. But without further ado, she turned and walked out of the house she had lived in for over 24 years. As she drove away from the house, the still figure of Malcolm flashed in the rearview mirror, standing like a large statue in front of one of the windows. For some reason, the image reminded her of an old movie she and Malcolm had watched years ago, Destroyer Angel, where several dinner guests were trapped in a house by a quirk of their own minds. Jessica wondered with some fear who was trapped, her or Malcolm? Malcolm watched her walk away, and the immense pain that constantly filled him now intensified, and an almost physical pain hit him in the stomach, making him reflexively groan. "Damn you, Jessica! You damn whore, you lying shit! Cheap, dirty whore!" Malcolm shouted, not addressing anyone in particular. He had to spill out somehow, or he would burst, and his mind would gush like water from a broken dam. He knew that then he would lose his mind completely. He slowly backed away from the window, a grim determination frozen on his face. "I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I'm going to find out who Jessica was seeing and what else is going on, and hopefully prove Claire wrong," Malcolm promised himself. With a plan of action in mind, Malcolm went to bed. Although his sleep was not sound, he was sure that Jessica had slept worse than he had in the morning. That certainty calmed his exhausted mind a little, and a slight, albeit anticipatory smile appeared on his face. Next chapter. The days following the night his wife left home were filled with a thick, blurry, changeable fog. Malcolm went to work, often staying late, even longer than his business partner Eric. He ate, he slept, he performed every task and every action adequately enough, but like a robot. He was on autopilot. He remembered almost nothing of his daily activities. In fact, he felt no particular emotion other than the determination to carry out the plan he had put into action. So when he wasn't at work, he was doing whatever was necessary to fulfill his plan. And then one day, he received the first of many answers. Next chapter. A few days after he kicked Jessica out, Malcolm's doorbell rang. It was his daughter Tricia. "Hey, Tricia, came to see your old," greeted Malcolm with a warm smile. It was the first such smile on his face in many days. Entering the house and walking past him, Tricia said without any preamble, "I'm here to pick up some of Mom's things." Her greeting was curt and accusatory. Slightly taken aback by her abrupt manner, but never stopping smiling, Malcolm said, "Good. I've packed up some of her things. I'll help you carry. I'll do it myself. Mom gave me a list of what she needs." And with those words, Malcolm's 19-year-old daughter set off to gather what she had come for. Tricia was usually an outgoing and cheerful girl. Her current behavior was very disturbing to Malcolm, but he understood that she must be under a lot of stress knowing that her parents were separated. Shrugging, he allowed his smile to return to its original place, whereupon Malcolm returned to the kitchen to finish his lunch. Finishing the last bite, Malcolm was pondering the past when Tricia flew into the kitchen with the speed only the young can do, stopped in front of his seated figure, threw up her hands and exclaimed angrily, "How could you, Daddy?" Caught off guard by her question and the fury with which it was uttered, Malcolm uttered the only thing that came to his mind. "Huh? How could you kick Mom out of her house?" Trish screamed, tears streaming down her face. Standing up and gathering the used dishes, he walked over to the sink. He was buying time, more to do the dishes. He didn't know how to answer his daughter's question without a detailed explanation. He knew Tricia would never be satisfied with an ambiguous answer. She would keep questioning everything, seeking an explanation until she was satisfied. In some respects, she was very much like him. And yet Malcolm was not prepared to open up, especially in detail, until he knew with unshakable certainty all the facts he now possessed. "Answer me, Papa," demanded the crying but thoroughly infuriated young woman. And almost at the same instant Tricia sighed sharply and asked perplexedly, "Are you cheating on Mommy?" Standing with his back to his daughter, he almost snorted with ironic amusement, but shook his head in response. He looked up from the plate he was scrubbing away and looked out the window above the sink. His gaze stopped on the large yard behind the house. A momentary flash of memories suddenly filled his mind. It was just a backyard. The swings and other children's toys that had once filled it were now long gone. But the memory made an imprint on what his eyes saw. Two small children were running around, screaming with joy and excitement as they played. Their mother stood nearby, watering the bed of flowers she had so diligently tended. As quickly as the memory had come, it just as quickly disappeared into the depths of his almost forgotten memories. His ears were still filled with the joyful sounds his children were making. "Tricia, sit down while I wash the dishes and then I'll try to explain." "No, now Daddy, Tricia." Malcolm growled, irritated by her uncompromising behavior. Tricia was smart enough to realize how far one could go in a relationship with her father, and she had just gone as far as she dared. So, like a dutiful daughter, Tricia clamped her mouth shut, pulled out a chair, and sat down. She wasn't happy, not at all, but she couldn't help it. After a couple minutes, Malcolm joined her. "Would you like something to drink? I've got some." Malcolm opened in a friendly manner. "No thanks. I just want to know why you kicked Mom out." Sighing, Malcolm ran a hand over his face before answering. "What did your mom say?" Malcolm asked, carefully controlling his voice. Tricia shook her head and replied bitterly, "She didn't say. She said you kicked her out. That's all she said. I asked her to tell me, but she just cried and told me to ask you. So I'm asking you. What happened that made you kick your mom out of your house?" Malcolm looked at his daughter and saw how much she resembled Jessica at her age. That comparison echoed with pain in his heart, which, in turn, hardened him even more. Your mother has done terrible things that I cannot and will not accept. Because of those actions, my mother and I have suffered a relationship. I don't want to discuss the details, so don't ask me about it. Trisha listened to her father's explanation, spoken in a monotone, almost droning voice, but she knew her father well enough to hear the pain behind every word. Still, Trisha couldn't believe to the end that her mother could have hurt the man she claimed to love so badly. Mom wouldn't do anything to hurt you, Dad. I know Mom. She's stubborn and argumentative, but she's not mean or callous. Maybe your skin is a little thinner than you think and you took her words the wrong way, Trisha said hopefully. No, Trisha. Whether your mother meant to hurt me or not, she still did things that have no place in a good marriage. Some men, some women, can overlook indulging their spouses, but I can't. Malcolm gave his daughter a strained smile to take away the pain of his last words, spoken grimly but firmly. Changing his smile to a more pleasant one, he asked, "Did you get what you came for?" Suddenly wide-eyed, Trisha stood up, or rather, jumped up from the table. The chair flew back a couple of feet from the hard and sudden contact with the back of her straightened legs. You and Mom are getting a divorce? Malcolm's tense silence was all Trisha needed in response. No, Daddy, you can't divorce Mommy. She loves you and you love her. Please, Daddy, don't do this, Trisha pleaded, bursting into sorrowful tears. Malcolm was silent for a moment, listening to his daughter's quiet sobs, then stood up and calmly walked over to his daughter, wrapped his arms around her and cradled her head against his chest. It's okay, T, you can cry. Remember, no matter what happens to me and your mom, I will always love you, and so will she. He had started calling her T when she was very young. This was at her request, as Trisha had had trouble pronouncing her own name from the beginning, and that's what she called herself, T. Malcolm quickly got used to it and started calling his daughter affectionately, but Jessica despised the nickname, complaining that it was an inappropriate name for any girl, much less her daughter. It wasn't until Trisha turned 14 and moved on to middle school that she asked Malcolm to stop calling her T, because she was uncomfortable being called that in front of her friends. Saddened by his daughter's request, he realized that the closeness and camaraderie they shared had come to an end, but nevertheless Malcolm stopped calling her by that nickname. Until now. After a few minutes, her sobs subsided and she pulled away from Malcolm. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to act out in the waterfall, but you caught me off guard. I mean, really, I'm a grown woman. I'm at university and living on my own. If you and Mom get divorced, it shouldn't affect me. Not like that anyway. Grinning slightly at the mention of his daughter's proclamation of, I'm a grown woman, Malcolm said quietly, more to himself than to Trisha. It's okay. I didn't expect it either. Stuff happens, and often it's stuff we don't like, but all we can do is move forward. He hugged his daughter one last time and then released her. Are you going to be okay now? Trisha nodded, wiping the tears from her face. Grabbing a paper towel, she headed to the sink to remove any remnants of sadness. Unable to comfort his daughter any longer, he sighed in frustration, then said somewhat cheerfully, Okay, then I'll help you pack and carry everything your mom told you to take. Come on, let's do that, and I'll take you out to eat, Trisha. Okay? Okay, Daddy. I'm all right now, and you can call me T if you want to. I like that. But only if you bring me M&M's ice cream for dessert. Malcolm, chuckling at her demand, said, Okay, T, you got yourself a deal. Next chapter. Mona was one of the kindest, most considerate and caring of ladies. She married Jung at 16 to an older man named Roy Leonard, who was 4 years older than her, which, given her age at the time, was definitely an older man. Despite some difficulties, particularly money problems, their marriage succeeded where others had failed. Mona also had a shrewd character and had made it clear to Roy early in the marriage that she would not tolerate any antics or fooling around. Roy was going to be a decent husband and a good father to their children. That was one of the reasons they stayed together, and Roy, despite his questionable character in other ways, loved his wife very much and would never do anything to hurt her. Mona never forgot the troubles she and her husband had gone through, and it tempered her judgment of others. So when Malcolm kicked Jessica out, Mona had rushed to comfort Jessica as soon as she heard about it. By then, Jessica was living in her parents' old house with her son and his 2 roommates. None of the roommates objected to Jackson's mother living with them. First of all, she was an excellent cook. And secondly, even at her advanced age, she retained the beauty and slenderness of a woman's form. This embarrassed Jackson to some extent, especially when his roommates drooled over his mother as a hot babe. 2 weeks passed, and the day before, Trisha had come and picked up her mother's things. Although Trisha was as friendly as ever, Jessica sensed a distinct change in her. It was the little things that gave her away. A slight hesitation where there shouldn't have been one. A thoughtful look, and when it was caught, Trisha's expression changed to a somewhat ashamed one. Yes, it was little things like this that gave Jessica the first hints of trouble with her daughter. Today was the third day in a row that Mona had come to visit, and Jessica was getting a little tired of her visits. "So, Jessica Ann, how are you today? I brought some dumplings for you. I remembered how much you liked them in the past." Placing a container of what looked like a Tupperware on the table, Mona immediately went to her favorite topic, bingo. "I'm telling you, girl, the winnings at some of these parlors are pretty big. Some even go up to $1,000. Not bad for 2 hours of smearing ink on a little piece of cheap paper. I'd like you to join me one night. I think you'd have a lot of fun. More fun than—" Mona looked around the room, stopping at a couple walls, as if she had X-ray vision and could see the mess of rooms on the other side. "Then stay here all night. I'm sure the boys like coming to your place, but— Say, I've got an idea. How about this? This Thursday, you come to the game with me. They're having a triple header. If you win all 3 games, the grand prize is a cruise for 2 to the Bahamas. Wouldn't that be great?" Jessica didn't know what to say back. She didn't feel like playing bingo, but she didn't want to offend Mona either. At that moment, Jackson walked through the front door. "Mom! Mom! Where— Oh, there you are!" Jackson shouted as the door's return spring slammed shut with a loud crack. "Hello, Mrs. Leonard." "Hello, Jackson. I swear you're looking more and more like your father every day." "Thank you, Mrs. Leonard." Jackson quickly turned to his mother, hoping to avoid Mrs. Leonard's awkward remarks. "Mom, I know this is really fast, but I forgot that we're having a bake sale for the club at the university this Friday. Do you think you can bake a couple of pies on Thursday?" Jessica was caught off guard by Mona's casual compliment to Jackson, and suspicious thoughts quickly raced through her mind. What did she mean? Did Malcolm know the children weren't his, and had he told Roy and Mona? Was Mona up to some twisted psychological game? When her son's request penetrated right into her darkest corner, Jessica quickly jumped at the chance to talk herself out of going to bingo. "Sure, Jackson." "Oh, wait," replied Jessica, then turned to Mona and smiled. "I'm sorry, Mona. I wish I could go with you, but family comes first, you know that. Maybe another time?" Mona was looking forward to Jessica joining her at bingo, but she was well aware of what family was all about. "Sure, don't worry, dear. We'll have plenty of other opportunities to get together." "Thank you so much for understanding, Mona," said a truly grateful Jessica, although her gratitude was not at all what Mona had intended, rising from her chair. "Not at all, my dear." Mona stood up as well. "I have to go now. Roy will be home soon, and if dinner isn't on the table by the time he gets here, he'll turn into a real menacing bear." Mona grinned at her own levity. "You know men. They get bigger, older, but they still get cranky like babies if they aren't fed, burped, and changed." After Mona left, Jessica's thoughts returned to the question of how much Mona knew and whether she was playing mind games with her. It seemed that everything Mona said indirectly related to Jessica's marital status and the causes of her problems. "Maybe I'm just being paranoid?" Jessica pondered as she prepared dinner for her son and his roommates. "Maybe I'm feeling guilty, just a little bit, and it's playing tricks on me. Maybe it is. Or maybe it's not." Next chapter. Ian Wilson was not a very patient man. A burning desire for revenge consumed his entire waking hours and even some moments of sleep. He fantasized and dreamed that this was exactly what would happen. How many times had he done nothing but hold himself back? So it was with a sigh of deep satisfaction that he learned that Malcolm had uncovered his wife's affair with him. He was beyond overjoyed. Years of pain and humiliation had been smoothed away by the pursuit and conquest of Jessica Ann Harris. Convincing her to bear him children was, to say the least, a brilliant solution to his sense of revenge. Not that he cared about his own or anyone else's children. It was simply another opportunity to advance his cause. He felt he had truly screwed up with Malcolm Harris. But no, he wasn't done with him yet. There was still one more thing left to do. "Hey, Jessica, how's it going?" Ian asked with fake sincerity as soon as Jessica answered the phone. He'd called her to make sure she was still his, that she was still on board, and more importantly, that she had no doubts about his own false feelings for her. "Hey, babe, I'm okay. How's it going?" replied a radiant Jessica. "Lonely. I've been waiting for you. I haven't heard from you in days." "Is everything okay?" Ian asked cautiously. "Yes, sweetheart. Everything's fine. And I miss you too. How I wish I could be next to you right now, in your arms. I'd call you, but we're in a hectic time. Besides, I've decided it's best to let Malcolm cool off. Besides, I don't want anyone to find out about us until I'm divorced. I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea and think I'm a slut. So I'm keeping it quiet for now." "Oh, but you are a whore of the highest order, my dear Jessica. You just don't know it yet. But you will find out, just like everyone else," Malcolm thought coldly, wanting to speak his mind. Instead, Ian spoke soothingly. "Shh. I understand, baby. You don't need to explain." Ian heard a loud sigh in the receiver and then, "Oh, baby, you always know just the right thing to say at just the right moment. I love you so much. I wish I could have met you first." "Me too." "Me too, baby," agreed Ian in a gentle but wistful tone. Then, already more firmly, he said, "But it's the way it is. All we can do is play with what we've been dealt. Anyway, you and I will soon be together. After that, nothing will matter." "I know, Ian. I know. But sometimes it's so hard," Jessica said, sadly and a little pitifully. "Oh, shit, I have to go, Ian. I love you. I'll call you soon." An unfunny smile spread across Ian's face as he disconnected the call. Everything was going so well. It's taken years to get to this point, but the result will be worth it, he thought with a laugh. It's time to put the last part of my plan into action, and I'll do it this Saturday. Then Malcolm will know what it is to have wasted nearly 30 years of his life. To find out that his wife is an easy whore and his marriage is nothing but a sham. To find out that the children he's raised aren't his, and to realize how loyal his good friends are. It would gut him. Encouraged by these jubilant thoughts, Ian Wilson laughs merrily as he slowly limps to his bedroom, where he sleeps the sleep of the victor. Next chapter. Malcolm sat and scrutinized the papers he held between his palms, then reread the report that accompanied the lab results. Nothing had changed since he'd last read it. The results were the same. He'd paid for the DNA analysis, and 2 weeks later, he held the undeniable results in his hands. Collecting genetic samples of his children turned out to be quite easy. Tricia still used the hairbrush she had left in her old room during her visits, and Jackson stopped by from time to time for a change of clothes and a meal. He also sent a hair sample from one of Jessica's combs. Jessica was definitely Tricia and Jackson's mother. Malcolm didn't know how to feel now. He didn't really believe Claire's claims, but they caused such an itch that he just had to scratch. He'd done the testing to prove her wrong, not to prove Claire right. He'd been angry before, but now, despite his grim satisfaction, Malcolm was angrier than ever at Jessica. At her running around, at her lies over the years, at everything else he could direct at her, which, in his opinion, was quite a lot. Had he loved her? He had once loved her, but as their relationship had gotten worse and worse, his love for his wife had suffered as well. Now he was almost certain that what love he could still feel for Jessica was so minimal as to be unaccountable. Was he hurt by her betrayal and lies? Yes, he felt the pain with every beat of his heart. His stomach still clenched into knots in those moments when his thoughts went back to the best moments of their past. And when he thought about what else that past held, the thoughts would abruptly cut off, and he would begin to rage at the decades of deception Jessica and her lover had perpetrated on him. Malcolm wasn't the type to put up with resentment, especially such a despicable betrayal, so he vowed to find out who Jessica's lover was and confront him the only way Malcolm knew how. It wouldn't be politically correct. It wouldn't be very civilized, and it would probably land him in jail, probably prison. But better to be a man behind bars than a cuckold on the loose. He still wasn't sure what he would do with Jessica, But he knew that divorce was just around the corner. There was no doubt about that. Believing that the children would eventually find out about their mother's infidelity and his own history. With that infidelity, he was going to at least publicly drag her through the mud until her skin came off and dirt took her place. Such an act was not satisfying. It was far less than what she had done to him. But short of tying her up and torturing her every day for the next 30 years, it was the best he could do, at least for now. Yeah, those mutual friends of theirs who'd helped cover up Jessica's cheating, he'd deal with another time, when they least expected it. Next chapter. Jackson? Hey, Dad. What's up? Jackson replied, holding the phone to his ear and trying to eat a very large stuffed burrito. I left some papers at home. Could you drive over there and fax them to me? I'm in a meeting out of town and I need those reports in about an hour. I'll send you the fax number. Can you do that? Malcolm asked, hoping his son wouldn't say yes and forget about it right after he hung up. Yes. Sure, Dad. It's sitting on my desk. It's called Research on Advanced Injection Molding for Increased Production. Don't worry, I'll send you the title. How soon can you drive up to the house? Okay, we'll be leaving in about, 20 minutes, so count on 40 minutes. Is that okay? Jackson replied, beginning to devour the first of 3 burritos. Yeah, that'll be fine. I'll send you the info as soon as we hang up. Okay, Dad. Bye. 5 minutes later, Jackson's cell phone beeped, indicating he'd received a text message. But he was too busy eating his second burrito to pay any attention to the phone. With his hunger satisfied, Jackson made his way to the living room, sat down in a rather comfortable upholstered chair, and turned on the television to see if there were any reruns of his favorite shows. A few minutes later, during a commercial for computers, he suddenly remembered his father's request. Glancing at his watch, he noticed that it had been 45 minutes since his father had called. Oh shit. Jackson knew his father would be furious, but his dad always said, better late than never. Hoping his father would understand and follow his wise philosophy, Jackson ran out the door and ran to the car. Racing like a madman, which was the normal way of driving for most young men his age, he made it to his father's house in half the time it would have taken otherwise. Somewhat proud of himself for making up for lost time, Jackson rushed to one of the posts at the gate and entered the code to unlock the gate. As soon as the gate opened, Jackson ran into the house, reading his father's message as he went. Where did his father say the documents were? In his desk? On his desk? I guess I'll have to look. Digging through the papers on his desk, Jackson found what his father wanted, but he also found something else. As he looked through those papers, his eyes widened in surprise. After another moment, Jackson shook his head in stunned confusion and focused again on faxing the papers to his father. But as he stood there, dialing the fax number and running each sheet through the scanner, his thoughts returned to what he had read on the other papers. He felt a slow anger begin to build in his mind. Next chapter. Later that evening, when Malcolm entered his house, a very upset son was confronted by a very tired father. Waving some papers around, Jackson stopped his brisk walking like a madman and met Malcolm's gaze. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did I have to read it off some piece of paper? Does Trish know? Watch your language, boy, Malcolm admonished sternly, expecting Jackson to apologize. I'm sorry, Dad, but... Waving for his son to shut up, Malcolm sank down onto the couch. Raising his eyes and meeting his son's gaze, he said, You weren't supposed to know anything about this. The harsh look silenced his son, ready to argue about what he should have known and what he shouldn't have known. I didn't tell you because I wasn't ready to discuss it with you or Trisha. I haven't made a decision on some things yet, and until I do, this topic is closed. Before he could finish the last sentence, Malcolm stood up and headed for the stairs. Dad, wait, I'm not done yet, Jackson said loudly, looking after his father as he walked away. Jackson, you can take the stomachache all you want, but I have nothing more to say. I'm going to bed. You can stay the night or you can go home. Either way, lock yourself in. Lock me out? Thank you. Good night. Frustrated by his father's stubbornness and angry at the situation, Jackson quickly walked out the door, slamming it shut and locking it. He knew his father well, and any further attempt to question him would simply piss him off. As he walked up the stairs, Malcolm heard the door slam and sighed in frustration. He understood the boy's feelings, But that didn't excuse his behavior, and until he decided how he wanted to behave in the near future, he wasn't going to discuss the matter. Now, if his wife wanted to discuss it with her son and daughter, then another matter. By all means, she should do it. Imagining what her reaction would be, a cruel smile stretched his face for a moment, and then he regained his stoic neutrality. Next chapter. Jessica hummed contentedly as she prepared her lunch. That afternoon, she was once again with Ian for the umpteenth time out of countless times. Beautiful Ian, strong Ian, rich Ian, loving Ian, rugged Ian. Or so she'd once thought. One of the things that marred their life together was his slow gait, caused by an injury that left him limping. It took him a very long time to get around, especially in his spacious house. Early in their relationship, Jessica had asked him about his limp. However, Ian was elusive in his answers. It happened a long time ago, before I met you. All the doctors said was that it was severe nerve damage and permanent ligament injury. There's nothing that can be done about it. End of story, Ian explained curtly. Taking offense at Ian's curt reply, Jessica replied with heavy sarcasm. Well, I didn't know. I'm sorry I asked. Since then, she had brought up the subject from time to time, and this afternoon she asked again about the history of his injury. I'm not going to discuss it, so stop asking, okay? What's wrong with you? You've been going on and on about it for years, but you've never realized anything. I don't want to discuss it. Jessica was furious. She was getting tired of Ian snapping at her, cooling down, then getting hot. Even though Ian felt aloof toward her from time to time, lately his ambivalence had been getting stronger and more frequent. If Malcolm hadn't found out about her and Ian's relationship, Jessica didn't know what would have happened. But she'd like to think she would have ended the years-long affair and thrown herself into her marriage, making up for all the years she hadn't belonged to Malcolm alone. Now she had no choice. She was betrayed. And yet, strangely enough, after Malcolm had kicked her out of her own home, she realized that she might leave Ian if it came to that. And that worried her a lot. Were her feelings for Ian based on nothing more than boredom? Or maybe revenge? If so, the thought was not a pleasant one. More than that, it was nauseating. What about her children? What did her reasoning and actions say about their existence? Perhaps sensing the change in her demeanor, Ian had slowed down a bit. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It's a sore spot for me and Ian began regretfully. Ian stopped talking when he saw Jessica smirk and then giggle. What's so funny? He asked, a little defensively. Jessica burst into a full-blown laughter. The sound was hilarious and delightful, at least that's what her husband would have thought, but to Ian it sounded rude and jerky. Forced even. It made him sick, and he hated her even more. Sore spot. Your leg. Sore spot, Jessica exhaled between fits of laughter. Huh? Breathing heavily, with tears running down her face from laughing, Jessica took a breath while explaining to Ian what she meant. The tension from a moment ago was gone, and she felt relieved. I'm really sorry about that. I shouldn't have laughed, but I thought it was funny. I don't know, it was just funny. Jessica smiled. Ian chuckled, though clearly insincere. Yeah, I understand. If you put it that way, it's probably funny. I'm sorry, sweetie. I wasn't laughing at you. But I want to have fun with you. End of part 1. Part 2 may be coming out in 10 hours. Write in the comments if you're waiting for it. Also, give a like under this video and subscribe to my channel. I hope you enjoyed this video.